Hi HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR leaders. Today's guest is Paulo Pisano. Paulo is the Chief People Officer for Galp Energia. Paulo, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Fantastic. Paulo, fill in the gaps. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and sort of your journey to becoming the Chief People Officer.
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Brazil, with a family that hails from Argentina and from Italy. So a bit of a mess in terms of a background, particularly when it comes to football. But anyway, in preserving with the family migration tradition, I left Brazil about 20 years ago and have been moving around to pursue an international career. I've started my career in management consulting and then migrated to the human capital and org development space. And I worked in a number of countries, in a number of sectors. And prior to my current role at Galp, I was a chief talent officer for Pearson based in the UK. And just a little bit under 2 years ago, I moved to Lisbon to take on the chief people officer role here. So that's been kind of my journey in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Pretty concise there. So what really compelled you then to move into the sort of HR industry?
Well, I love working with teams and with individuals. I love helping people to improve and really operate at their top performance. That's something I've connected with early on in my career as a consultant. And I'm a big believer in the power that organizations have to transform the world we live in. I think increasingly, right, the big solutions to the massive challenges we have around the world are going to be solved by or contribute or with some contribution from organizations. So the work in HR, in organizational development in general, I think provides a great place to do that, right? Where you can have massive impact in organizations, in teams, with people. And I think the higher up you are in the organization, or the more responsibility you have, the more you get to be really kind of first a business person and only second an expert in your field. So the chief people officer role does exactly that, right? It gives you a very broad space to work from and an opportunity to impact leaders who in turn impact a lot of people.
Fantastic. So where we are now, you've progressed on to the Chief People Officer role. What really occupies your mind on a day-to-day basis?
Well, lots of things, right? I think that's one of the characteristics of the role is there's a big variety of projects, of topics, any given time. With that said, I'm constantly, I wouldn't say worrying about, but thinking about how we're doing as a business in our company. And if the work we're doing in the people team is really helping us get where we need to get to, if we're engaging our colleagues from across the business, if there's a real kind of shared responsibility to build the kind of environment that will get us to engage people to do their best work with us, right? So something around not carrying the burden of kind of the people agenda on our own, but making sure we're engaging the leaders around us to take their piece of the accountability on that. That's what I think keeps me most connected with in terms of the work we do.
Fantastic. And could you share perhaps a transformation or project, either past or present, that sort of you're most personally proud of?
Yeah, I think I've been lucky enough to be part of some pretty interesting projects along the career, and one that comes to mind. It's actually from quite a while ago, and I think maybe I'm proud of that project, not just because it was a big challenge, but because it was I'd say relatively earlier on in my career, an opportunity to see a company doing the right thing for all stakeholders, not just their shareholders, but also everyone that was involved in the business and colleagues as well. And this is back in, I think, just before the year 2000. So that's been quite a long time ago. I'm kind of telling you almost my age here, but I was working with Citibank in the Caribbean and Central America region. And this is at the time where Travelers merged with Citigroup. So there was a lot happening at that time. We had effectively created the largest and most global financial institution in the world. And there was a decision as we were doing the strategic review of the business to shut down some of our businesses in that region. And many of them were startup businesses. We had just started pulling them together. And it meant actually going kind of in reverse and leaving the credit cards business in the region. Mm-hmm. And what it meant as a project is that for us in the HR team, we had to work out that transition and protect the brand of the business, ensure that we sold the portfolios for the best possible value. But at the same time, we felt a duty of care for the people that we had hired. Those businesses hadn't been there for a very long time. And we felt that a lot of good people left good jobs to come and join us. And now we're saying we're going to do something different. So it was a complex project. We had to have the involvement of a lot of people across the organization to get it done well. And the interesting thing about that project in particular is that we partnered with the corporate banking part of the business, who had great relationships with a number of businesses in the countries in the region. And we used that connection, we leveraged that connection to try to find jobs for our people, because they already knew and respected the corporate banking business at Citibank at the time. They knew we were good at hiring good quality people and developing them. And they were, as we engaged with them, more than happy to speak with many of our employees because they knew we had quality with us. So at the end of the project, not only we managed to do, I'd say, a relatively smooth exit from the business, but we managed to place most of the people that were displaced, either through outplacement services or through our own clients for the bank. So it was a pretty good one, and this is already almost 18 years ago.
Fantastic. And so what did you sort of learn, looking back at it now, what have you taken away from that?
Well, the fundamental thing is make sure whenever you have big transformation projects or restructuring projects, that you are well connected with people from across the organization, right? Any project like that is going to need the goodwill, the collaboration, the support, the technical perspective of a lot of different people within the organization. And I think it's not uncommon that we only start making stronger, deeper connections with some of our colleagues in other parts of the business when we need that, rather than building good, trusting, collaborative relationships over time, right? Mm-hmm. So that when you do need kind of that level of integrated action, it's easy for it to happen because the connections are already there. And back in the day, it was a lot of work to do that because perhaps we didn't have that in mind early on. Mm-hmm. As you look at it in hindsight, you say, hey, we could have done more prior to that happening.
Yeah. Well, certainly in my career from speaking with senior leaders like yourself, the ones that are most successful are the ones that when they first joined the business spent most of the time building those relationships across the organization. So when, as you said, when it came time for change, they had the full backing and support of the team. Whereas I've seen the complete opposite happen, where you've gone straight into an organization and immediately tried to change the business before even actually engaging the other senior stakeholders, and not just the senior stakeholders, but all of the line managers and the employees in that process, and providing that transparency as well. So
absolutely true. And then there's actually great research, right, around a relatively high level of failure when you kind of transition executives that have been many years with one organization. They were very successful, and you pull them into a new business. One of the reasons why you have a relatively high degree of failure is because part of their success in the previous business
was based on their relationships.
That they had a great network, but then they can't kind of replicate that so fast. And then what do, right? That's what
I see that even on a smaller scale. As a sales director in my last business, that we had very highly successful guys come and join the company who are very great in their last organization, join a new business, and all of a sudden they're suffering, and the amazing skills and results that were seen before are no longer there because they don't have the support, the network, the environment. So many different factors can affect that, and a lot of people don't take that into consideration.
Absolutely.
That's very, very interesting. So where we are now in your own business, where do you see sort of the biggest room for improvement for the organization, and how are you and HR helping the company succeed?
Yeah. The business I'm in, so Galp is an integrated energy company, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's based in Portugal, but it's global in nature. We have offices in 14 countries. We do business in over 50. So, like many energy organizations, it grew over the decades as a combination of pretty different businesses. So, what you have now effectively is not one single integrated culture or organization, but a collection of different businesses that are somehow tied together under one brand. But even the business models are different. The culture is quite different as well. So the big opportunity we have as a business, if we want to tackle some of the great opportunities and the disruptions that we see in the energy space ahead of us, we need to be more integrated. We need to be more collaborative. We need to build a culture that's pointing in the same direction. We need to build ways of working that are compatible, right? And an environment that gets people to be truly engaged with what we're trying to do, with our mission, creative, looking to the outside, and networking outside of our company, outside of our field. So there's a few things that can happen there. And HR, or the people team for us, is very much at the center of that, right? Because we have, in a way, by the very nature of our function, an alibi or a good reason to meddle with any part of the business, right? We can get everywhere. We have a pretty broad perspective, I'd say kind of helicopter view of the organization. We get to influence the kind of talent that comes in, the kind of talent that gets moved around the organization, that gets promoted, that needs to be exited. We have a say in the structure of the organization. We can help bring external perspectives to influence our leaders and to get them to think more broadly or in a different way. So there's many ways in which we can connect with the various parts of the business and help them make that transition. So I'd say, that's the biggest opportunity we have as an organization, is to prepare for a pretty, I'd say,
big shift.
volatile, difficult to predict, certainly technology-focused future.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, what we're doing here is trying to build the equivalent of great athletes, right? We don't know exactly what kind of sport we're going to play, but as long as we have great athletes, we are closer to being able to perform well in whatever it is that we're going to do.
It's a great analogy. Good, great way of putting it. So what steps are you taking now to integrate the cultures in the business?
So there's a number of steps. It's a pretty systemic way of tackling it, because there are no silver bullets, right?
No.
So in
approaches, of course. Yeah.
Absolutely. So in one hand, you have to work, for example, from a top-down standpoint, making sure that the executive team and the leadership of the organization in general, they are working well together. They're collaborating. They're breaking silos, because the better they work together and they connect with one another, the better an example and a symbol they become for the organization. In one hand, people look up and they're going to naturally kind of replicate those behaviors. In the other hand, by connecting well together, they're going to make the lives of their teams most times easier. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So they can break bureaucracies and they can kind of get things done more quickly. So that's one example. What we're doing kind of from a top down is really working on both organizational design and leadership development for the top of the house. In the other hand, it is looking at different ways of doing things we have across the organization, be it the way you manage careers, or you manage reward and recognition, or performance management, and establishing principles in a way that people can start pointing to the same direction, right? In some cases, we're standardizing processes and ways of doing things. In other instances where we might have JVs or companies that are part of the group but not very close to the center, we are at least establishing principles. Now, they don't have to do exactly the same thing we do, but as long as they're basing their decisions or managing their talent in a following a philosophy, I guess,
mm-hmm.
It means we're starting to point at the same direction. And then talent, and then it's now the people you bring in or the people you promote. They've got to be people that have that mindset, right? They have a mindset of an integrated organization. They know how to work across matrix. They know how to collaborate. So those are some of the examples of things we're doing.
So traditionally, were the senior leaders from each of those three divisions working together, or were they completely independent?
Historically, we've had divisions that were quite independent. When I got here, we were already in I'd say, somewhat convergence process, because you have, on one hand, the gas and power business that is more like a utility. You have the exploration and production, that's the upstream business. It's very different, very global in nature. You have the downstream business, kind of retail and distribution, which tends to be very much focused on the country where you are at. So they are quite different. We had started making some inroads into building some connectivity between the businesses, but I think we really accelerated in the last year and a half, in particular, by making some shifts in terms of organizational design, by strengthening some of the corporate functions, because they can act. I think when you have a good corporate center, if it's not too big, and that's sometimes the issue, right? Sometimes corporate centers get really bloated and bureaucratic, but when you have them at the right size and fit for purpose, they can actually be a connective tissue for the organization, right? They can be a great way to gel and bring people together and get them to work more together. And I think that's what we've been doing, but there's still, I'd say, a long way to go.
Sure. And you mentioned earlier about the technological changes that we're seeing now, especially within your own industry. It's huge, probably biggest shift, I suppose, that's ever happened in your industry. And I know that from speaking to a number of your competitors. How are you guys currently prepared for that in terms of the skill sets that are required for the future, I suppose, of the industry? What approach are you taking on in that area?
Yeah, so I think technology, as you say, it's not something that's happening with some sectors or some companies. It's going on across the board. For us, it's interesting because I'm new to the energy sector, but as I came in, I realized that it is a sector that is full of paradoxes, I guess, like many others. In one hand, it's viewed by people that come from outside the sector as a relatively slow, kind of pretty long-term kind of thinking type of sector, which is true. In the other hand, you have some parts of the sector which are extremely technologically advanced, right? If you look in the exploration and production side, for example, these guys have been using technology for deep water exploration, for example, that is like a NASA grade type of technologies. The way we're trying to work with this is number one, to raise awareness. So that's one thing, right? Many businesses think that the whole kind of internet digital technology thing is going to happen somewhere else, and it's going to take a while until it gets here. So part of it is building the kind of so-called burning platform, and to expose people to other perspectives, to other views, get them to see alternative scenarios for the future. We've applied scenario planning for strategic planning, which is not something invented here. Actually, something as you know, kind of started with a few companies, Shell amongst them, I think the most well known, and it's been around for quite a long time. But to get people to think about future scenarios and what the alternative scenarios might be and what the implications are for what we're doing today has been a good way to get people focused on what's important about technology for us, right? We've been building teams around that. So we've been building, for example, a digital team for one of our businesses. We've been strengthening the innovation team at the corporate center. We've created events around, for example, digital and technology. We have a digital week coming up in a few weeks. So we're going to have a full week of events across our different offices to get people more connected, more in touch with what's happening in that space. And then we've developed projects that leverage technology in a different way. So for example, how do you use big data and deep analytics to kind of crunch your geophysical data and to improve your odds of finding natural gas, for example, somewhere, even by kind of just a little bit, right? And that can make a huge difference. So we've got partnerships with companies like IBM or SAP and a number of others to try to explore how we can leverage technology to get an edge in what we do. And we're not alone, right? So we're doing good stuff, but I look around and I see other companies doing interesting things in this space in our sector as well.
Sure. And I suppose a big part of that obviously is having the right people, of course, for the talent. How are you guys with the big battle going on right now for that digital talent? And traditionally, obviously, you're not an industry that, that's seen as the digital side. And I'm sure. So what are you doing from a branding perspective to ensure that, graduates or people in that area sort of consider you guys as a company that they could work with?
Absolutely.
Traditionally, that's a challenge for everyone, that seems, especially within the energies.
I think you're right. I think so. It depends where we are. So, for example, in Portugal, Galp is the biggest
Sure,
company in
everyone knows
Portugal.
you there. Hmm.
It's a big brand. So in Portugal, for example, we haven't had much of an issue attracting people here. People want to come here, and there's great talent in Portugal. It's got very, very strong in engineering. People speak languages. I think the challenge for us here will be increasingly that there's a lot of companies moving their middle and back offices here to Portugal, and it tends to be technology and operations and customer service. So for some of those digital skills, we're starting to see increased competition from other big organizations. Our edge is still that our headquarters are here. So there's a difference in working at the headquarters of an organization in Portugal rather than working for a back office or mid office from a British or American company that has a few things here. In some other countries, it can be a bit more difficult. For example, in Brazil or in Spain, where we have bigger competitors as well. It is about the narrative you build. It's all about the story, right? And I think there's one advantage we have. We are although we are we turn over about 14 billion euros a year, which is not
just 14 billion.
It's not small, right? But for an energy company, if you compare us with the super majors like Shell or BP, we're quite small and we're quite nimble. And we are going through a nice transformation. If you look at the last 3 years, while the market in energy in general has been suffering quite a lot, we've had the last couple of years were record years. So we're going in a good trend because we have a good portfolio and we have some of the best assets in the market. So my narrative for people coming in has to do with that, right? Yes, we're in energy, but we're a pretty small and nimble player in that space. We're going through I'd say, a more rapid transformation than some of the massive companies that have hundreds of thousands of people. We have just under 10,000 people, which is, again, relatively small for a sector. Right? We have a different footprint than many other companies. So we're only in 14 countries in terms of offices, and we have an edge in the Portuguese-speaking world, for example, where you have Brazil, Portugal, some countries in Africa and in Asia as well. So that's a different edge. And the energy sector is going through a big transformation, right? So for people, for me, one of the things that attracted me was exactly that, right? Was looking at a sector that's going through massive change. You can have massive impact in terms of the technologies, the electrification in the markets, et cetera. And it's great to be in a place like that. So again, by no means, it removes the challenges of competition, but it helps, I think, that we have a pretty good narrative around people coming in.
Fantastic. So it seems like you're never going to have a boring day then, when you're running towards the change. Well, it's a good thing that you either avoid it, right, or you run towards it, but it's coming either way.
That's absolutely
so it's just great to hear that that's one of the reasons you joined the business, because you could see that change and you personally could have an impact on that. So that's fantastic. So where do you see, you mentioned about there's a lot of things you're doing around transformation. In your career, what have you found to be the most effective ways of communicating your strategy with the other members of the leadership team? That's always a challenge for our members. No matter how long we talk about this topic, selling, I think HR now has a role of selling a great narrative and being a good salesman in the business to sell the story. What effective ways have you used to get the attention and the buy-in?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Chris, because my short answer would be that if you are truly interested and connected with the business, that's kind of all you need. Because many times HR professionals, they fall in love with their processes and with their tools, right? HR people in general are by definition process people. There's a whole history to it. I think it's changing, but not fast enough. And it's one of the functions, at least in my opinion, that has been most self-absorbed in the last few years, right? There's all these questions about having a seat around the table to find this and that.
Sure.
I think it's not, as long as you're focused, it's not about HR, but it's about the business and how we can contribute to the effectiveness of the business. So although I could talk about a number of ways in which, anyone could do a better job in connecting and engaging with their leaders, nothing, I think, will be more powerful than the trust you build by being truly engaged with their agenda. So if you're connected with their agenda, what is it that's keeping them up at night? What are the challenges their business has in the next quarter, in the next year, in the next 5 years? That opens up not only a better channel to connect with them, but gets you to really reflect if what you're going to bring to that conversation really makes a difference to that business and is really going to help them somehow become more effective or get to their results or not.
Fantastic. So it's really, that's what, yeah, you're completely right. And I hear this all the time now, more and more. It's about understanding the business and working your way backwards and understanding, well, how can HR help the business achieve those objectives, or those individual stakeholders in the company, not focusing on building great HR processes and tools, then trying to make those processes and tools fit the organization in a way that works as well. So
absolutely, I think in a way it's the comparison I'd make is, as you're growing through your function, you tend to look at the business from an HR standpoint. But there's a point at which you have to shift and start looking at HR from a business standpoint. And it might look like a subtle change, but it's a very important one. You're not using an HR lens to look at the business. You're looking at the business first, and then looking back at your kind of a toolbox, your mindset, your practices, etc., and trying to make that connection. And that's an important shift.
So for HR leaders that aren't currently thinking that way, or perhaps they've joined a new business, what are the steps that they should take to engage? For example, when you joined the organization, what was the first thing that you did?
Listen a lot and ask lots of questions. I think there's something also I notice around HR, and I wouldn't call it yet a theory, but it's just something I've observed is, when I was early in my career in HR, I remember I was business partnering with folks that were my friends' bosses, right? So I had much more exposure to very senior people much earlier than the people my age. And I think it's probably common for most HR people. And what I think sometimes happens there is you have to learn pretty early on in your career to be credible by having the right answer, by knowing your stuff, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. You have to do your homework, you have to put in the hours, you have to be smart about how you work, and you have to bring in kind of good advice for your businesses. But the further up you go in the organization, the more you work at the senior level of the organization, the more the issues you have to deal with, the challenges, they're not black and white. They're very hard. They're issues that don't have clear answers. And therefore, the way you have to help your clients or your colleagues in general is many times more around asking the right questions and helping them to think through or to work together on something rather than bringing an answer. And what I see a lot of HR people doing is, no matter where they are in their career, is they want to bring the answer as opposed to listening and asking lots of questions. So I think asking questions, being curious about what's happening is probably one of the best ways to get to a space where you can be a really effective, consultant, advisor, colleague, whatever it is.
And do you think that that's just due to, the culture of HR and that just a shift in mindset? Because traditionally, I suppose that was the thought process, right? What was it that made you have that sort of mental shift to think that way? Because it seems that most people that, especially when I started, I was 17 years old, 10 years ago, it's completely different. the things I'm talking about now with HR leaders compared to 10 years ago is worlds apart. And it was very much what you just said there about coming with a solution rather than asking questions and understanding the needs and then presenting some options there.
I think what really started shifting that for me, besides just observing and looking around me and also trying and failing myself, is when I started getting closer to coaching, and I started kind of a coaching track also about 15 years ago. And I think the good coaching schools focus a lot on that. I think there's a lot of coaching happening around. It's become pretty fashionable, right? The whole executive coaching thing. But I think there's a lot of coaching work happening out there. They're more focused on what are the lists of questions I should ask or what have you. But they're good coaching schools that they focus, rather than on the questions you have to ask, on you becoming a better observer of the world around you. So you become better at being curious, connecting with your own curiosity, your own instinct. And if you do that, you don't have to worry about having the right list of powerful questions to ask, because your natural curiosity, and if you're kind of, if you've done your homework, if you're kind of relatively smart, you can get there and you can help your colleagues uncover interesting things or patterns or identify blind spots, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd say I connected with it through coaching, but a lot of it is just noticing around. It's got to be that shift. It's more about observing, listening, asking questions.
Yeah, that's something that I had when I first became a manager. I was 19, thrown into the deep end. Every single person I was managing was much older than me, much more experienced in some cases. All of them sort of graduated out of university. I didn't go to university. I just went straight from school into it. And the first thing I learned early on was just to ask questions. Never assume. In terms, I always in sales, it's always important to understand the motivators for everyone on my team, because what drives them, it's not money, it's what they do with the money. That's what people don't realize. It's never about the money. And I think being in sales as well really helped, because all we do is ask open questions.
There you go. Absolutely.
And that's otherwise you never, if someone gives you a call and just tries to talk at you, and just hopefully a solution they say it fits, then it's not really going to work. But asking questions, understanding, that's a skill which is really underrated.
Absolutely agree. I think HR has a lot to learn from sales and also from marketing in general, right? So absolutely.
Well, look, I know we're short on time as well, so I think this leads us quite nicely onto the quickfire round, where I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and you have no more than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers. Are you ready?
Okay. I can't guarantee the amazing answers, but let's see what comes up.
No problem. What was one thing that was holding you back from becoming a senior HR leader?
Well, I think it was more around finding the right opportunity, that one project or business that I was truly passionate about to make the leap.
Fantastic. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
Be a business person first and HR second.
Fantastic. And what's one book that you would recommend to our audience, and why?
Conscious Business by Fred Kaufman. It's a great book that captures very interesting practices and concepts from different people in a very well-integrated way, in very clear language, and very relevant to the work we do, because it connects with some of the biggest issues we deal with in the organization as HR people.
Great. I'll certainly link that in the description. And could you share one internet resource that you use to perhaps increase productivity or stay in tune with current events?
I like Evernote. Take lots of notes, pictures, clippings, writing down, recordings, you name it. Yeah. And I've been liking more and more Trello as well, which I've been using for project management. Absolutely.
I don't think I could live without Evernote. I use it every day. Me and my business partners use that also to communicate and share our notes with each other as well, which is really good. What's one thing about your business that most excites you today?
Well, I think it's the potential for transformation. As I was mentioning, the energy sector is full of amazing opportunities, and the company we are in that space right now offers a great platform for change and for trying new things. So all about possibilities.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate that you've taken the time to join us and the advice that you've given our members. Before you leave, if you could give our members one parting piece of guidance, and then also the best way to get in contact with you.
Well, I'd stay with my ramblings around listening. I mean, listen more, ask more questions. I think that's one of the things that has been most useful for me throughout my career. Getting in touch, LinkedIn, usually the best way. So easy to find me there, and I tend to check it at least once a day, once every other day.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. Guys, make sure you head over to hrdleaders.com. There you'll find all of the show notes on the episode, everything we've been talking about. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel or on iTunes, whatever works best for you. Paulo, again, thank you for sharing your journey, and I wish you all the best until we next speak.
My pleasure. Take care.